Kiran Jesudasan, and I head the design efforts at dRISK.ai. I've been there for about 5.5 years now, pretty much since its inception. It touches onto a theme that sort of continues through my entire career, which is to be the creative weirdo in an otherwise extremely technical, extremely engineering focused organization. And, I think my story is very similar to many other creatives within this space, which is, it all starts from Lego. I didn't really have much, growing up as a kid. I mean, it was just me and my mom, but that was one thing that she insisted that I get as much of as possible. And, I was always obsessed with building things, and spaceships and cars. And I was also kind of fortunate to be able to travel around a lot, which meant staring outside the windows of airplanes and seeing this absolute symphony of vehicles all dancing around, extremely complex. I mean, vehicles I've never seen. They're so custom and weird and specific for their role, right? But to see this magical symphony just happen right outside your window, all of them little pieces scurrying around. It was amazing. That was one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen or noticed, and I'd spend hours drawing them and trying to make all of these little things with Lego and build out these hyper complex systems made up of little pieces. And I think that's where my love for things that move, but also things that move within an otherwise very complex environment for a particular goal became, something that I was obsessed with. I wasn't great at traditional academics and stuff. I was always lost in my own world, doodling spaceships or whatever in my textbooks. And that prompted me to figure out, what design was and as a potential career. I came from a background, my mom's a doctor and she had no idea what design or product design or transportation design sort of entailed, but gave me the space to figure that out and actually support when she needed to. So I was super fortunate for that, and even before joining undergrad, I had the opportunity to work with this bioengineering department of a hospital that was designing India's first super cheap prosthetic arm, and this was, let's build out an arm, an elbow, and a shoulder joint, totally coming up to about 50 pounds.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was a mandate by the one of India's health ministries, to come up with an ultra cheap prosthetic arm. And right out of high school, because what I used to do in my free time is sit and play around and make spaceships in CAD, right? Which sure is a hobby, I guess. But because of that, I got roped into this project where I actually design the CAD models that they were going to be using for production and stuff. So, and this was my first sort of foray into working with seemingly ultra technical organizations, but who had a need for being able to visualize, very complex parts. Obviously for a very specific production grade reason, but it was amazing, and it was super cool because using this project, I got to skip a year of college and jump straight into the second year, which was, and I did product design in Malaysia. It was nice to get a different scene, step into a more cosmopolitan, part of the world, exposure to more cultures and food ultimately. But yeah, product design was great. It aligned with everything, that I wanted to do, which is to be, sure, building something to mechanical grade precision is great, but the process of how you get there, trying different prototypes, quick and dirty things, and that iterative process is what I really enjoyed, figuring out, working with people and seeing how a thing has to change to better, suit their needs or whatever that might be. And then I came back to India and joined Volkswagen India, which was where I started my official career. And that was a surreal experience. Yeah, I was there for about 2 years, and just getting to see a car come together. Not the airports were complex. This is a whole other ball game, right? The thousands of suppliers all sending the parts to this one place. The way there are parts of the factories where even the R&D department cannot step into, right? This allure of high grade secrecy and trade secrets and stuff, but ultimately all feeding a line which hundreds of thousands of people are sort of on putting together this thing that ultimately becomes, something that you can just get in and drive. That was magical. I mean, the scale of it, I mean, it's just wow. And then it was great. But again, this is another hyper technical organization. Volkswagen India, a lot of the creative stuff is not really done in the satellite R&D departments. They tend to be focused in, Wolfsburg or, where the studios are. So, I mean, I did have a great time, honestly, and the learning experiences there were amazing. But there was a part of me which is just like, hey, where can is there a way that I can, be creative and actually explore and, muck around a bit as opposed to, this is the one thing that we're going to be working on.
Yeah, because I guess, as you say, that the level of creative control, I suppose, that you must have must be quite limited, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not you can, I mean, there was very limited sort of part design and product design work that actually went on because things used to be specified in other places. Even though, I was fortunate to be working on the one team that actually did a lot of that, but it's still, it wasn't, I mean, I wanted more, basically. I mean, more, prototyping and more, actually engaging with people and figuring out what they'll see, how that fits back into the process, which tends to happen much further up the figurative chain. So I wanted to, get into a master's program, and at the Art Center College of, I mean, this is basically one of those automotive meccas, right, for transport. I mean, like transportation design as a whole. But, for the next couple of years, I did not have a portfolio that was strong enough. So in the meantime, I did a little bit of graphic design here and there, consultancy work and stuff, just to pay the bills. But on the side, continue to up my skills, work on my portfolio. And then in 2015, applied to Art Center and got in, and I was happiest moments of my life. Finally going to Pasadena, taking a huge astronomical loan, and just sort of betting it all on the possibility that go to a new land and try and crack it. And it was great. I mean, it was one of the most eye-opening experiences ever. Because I had a very narrow or traditional mindset of what design is, which is, let's just build a pretty thing and build and ship that off. Whereas here, I was super fortunate to understand how people have moved in the past. How do cities actually influence the way that we move? What are lessons that we have chosen to carry forward as we move towards these ultra new mobility technologies, especially autonomous vehicles, flying cars. What from the past do we actually carry into the future? And I was dived into sociology a little bit, the role of the city as a place-making space, what that ultimately means to the people who inhabit there, and how they access the things that ultimately make what they need to live their own life, their friends, their circles, their obviously professional accessibility and to opportunity. It was fascinating. It's just wow, transport is the means to literal upliftment. And that is what that was one of the lenses that I was viewing things, and it was amazing. It's not just a pretty thing. I mean, it can be a pretty thing, but I mean, it was wow. I mean, the way that we move has clearly higher purposes than just showing off or being able to do a quarter mile time in way less, whatever, sub 9 seconds. Even though that's cool, even though not underplaying that. But yeah, it's just, those are the things that I was super attracted to while studying. I got to work with a lot of civic authorities and their innovation programs. I figured out how to connect parts of the city. I got to work with Uber on their flying car project. Imagine what the experience of actually navigating a flying car system is like. Truly cool stuff. And then when I graduated, I was I want to be a researcher and a strategist at Uber and all ride-hailing organization. My thesis was built around it. But then I had one of my professors had joined a startup in this place called AI Pod. It was we're looking for our first designers and our first researchers and stuff. I'm like, okay, this is cool. You're joining a startup as an international student. You're going to have visa issues. Startups don't, whatever. Do they survive? Do they not survive? I mean, are these, whatever. What is your tolerance for risk? And I'm sitting there and thinking about all this and nah, screw it. Let's just go for it. And, the startup was great. They were doing, trying to figure out how do you actually deploy autonomous vehicles in a manner that is cooperative with civic authorities. How does one actually, what does that even mean in the first place? Because, I mean, these are word questions, right? They have not been asked before, Or, I mean, even if they have, the types of answers that you get are like inherently superficial. They're not really deep and they're not really complex, which ultimately the space is, right? And then one of the core projects, the lead from that, who was actually running this grant that we had won called the dRISK grant, managed to hold rights to that particular project and brought me on right off the bat, and I have been there for the last 5.5 years. Oh my god, almost 6 years now. And yeah, and that experience, this experience is, it's just insane. But we started off trying to, the thesis of what we do was, how do we know what autonomous vehicles actually face on the roads? How do you actually figure out what the range of possibilities are that an AV will face? And this is a very hard question. If you actually think about it sort of philosophically, it's a very hard question to answer. And our founder was genius, Dr. Jesudasan. Like he built this core tech called, being able to interact with this data structure called a knowledge graph. And simply put, it's just a way of aggregating varieties of different data sets and fusing that together, and then being able to actually interrogate the fused thing as a whole, as opposed to individual pieces. So what did this mean? For autonomous vehicles, what are types of data that aggregate risk? So we were looking at the structured accident data reports that cities and countries put out, police report, insurance claims data, but also weirder things like CCTV feeds, dash cam feeds, experts who study sensors and understand like sensor failure modes. How do we take this bolus of knowledge and be able to use that together and then be able to say, ooh, what will an autonomous vehicle face? So during my early stages of my career at dRISK, it was, let's figure out, all of the range of data sets that are out there. Let's like try and fuse all of them together. Let's build out, an understanding of the chaos of the world, be able to simulate that and use those simulations in the right distribution. Because, there are zillions of things, almost infinite things that can happen, right? What is actually relevant? What should you be testing against? If you take everything in the world that could happen and simulate it, you'll probably be simulating for the next, whatever, it's an infinite challenge, right? So the question becomes, how do you actually understand what you should simulate, and how can you be certain that what you're actually simulating is representative of what the autonomous vehicle faces? We won a grant from the UK's Department of Transport on that exact thesis, where the UK's government was looking for a mechanism to understand how to simulate. And when we pitched our approach, we won a £3 million grant, and that's what birthed the company. And so the first, so for the first 3 years of working with dRISK, this is what we were focusing on, building out all of these techniques to fuse varieties of data that inherently do not speak to each other, that are weird and very disparate. At one point, we just go out to the streets and ask people, what is the weirdest thing that you've seen? How does that piece of information become a valid test case for an autonomous? How do you even map it onto this space, And that was one of the most fun things about working in this space, because it's how do you deal with complexity of so many, on such a high order of math, but still make it approachable and usable and ultimately an asset for self-driving car companies. Then we sort of realized, hey, if you can do this for self-driving car companies, you can, and their AI is some of the most safety critical kinds of AI. And if you have an ability to gain insight into it and how to actually train it so that it performs better, this is clearly applicable to any and all industries that leverage AI, right? So that's where my career sort of took a gigantic shift, which was, all right, let's figure out all of the use cases that it actually works. Let's actually build a tool and like a user-friendly interface that allows people to toss in their own data and ask these questions for themselves. Firstly, to understand the data as deeply as possible, to fuse it, and then to actually be able to use that structure as to be able to train AIs and stuff in a way that does not need code. That to me was one of the most honorable missions somebody could well, really anybody could commit their career or their lives to almost. And yeah, that's what I do now, and trying to figure that out, try to figure out how we sell stuff, try to really position ourselves and like communicate our value but at the same time working on the development of the tool as well. So it's basically all things creative, whether it's marketing, whether it's internal design, whether it's decks, whether it's actual usability, actually it's talking to users, building out personas, mapping out, user behaviors and stuff within the tool, and seeing how that feeds this iterative cycle of improvement for the, the next release. That's basically my career.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a great, and you kind of touched on it then, but one of the things I was really keen to understand was that, could you talk to us a little bit more about some of the exciting problems, I guess, that you guys are trying to solve at dRISK?
At the high level, it's how do you understand your data better, and how do you actually get the most out of this? And I'll give you a couple of points into both the autonomous vehicle industry as well as how it sort of extrapolates into other more general use cases of AI. Now, I think there are multiple statistics on this, but an autonomous vehicle generates roughly in the order of 4 terabytes of data per day of operating. There's a massive amount, right? You've got several full HD cameras, you've gotten several LiDAR pieces that are all building this very, very, very complex understanding of the world, of literally trying to measure every single moving thing around them, right? And you store oodles of this data, and then engineers, when they have to come back to change their AI models, you've got to sift through so much. And then you start to realize something. Almost all the data you have is worse than useless. And I'll explain what I mean by worse than useless, because it has nothing of interest that actually helps an AI model, right? An AI model is excellent at things that it is trained against, and horrible against things that it has not been trained against. So when you feed oodles and oodles of normal driving into an AI model, it becomes excellent at handling normal driving. What human beings have, say what you want, have evolved their mind to be so advanced and have this innate idea of self-preservation that you do not have to train a person to handle every single scenario. You just give them the driver's test, and if they can sort of handle it, you go into the, you have a certain degree of confidence that they step into the world, and this instinct to protect themselves, if something swerves into their path, they will acquiesce and do the quote unquote right thing. For autonomous vehicles, that is not the case. If you train it with normal things, it becomes excellent at dealing with normal things. But the second you throw something weird out there, it breaks the system, and you have complete, you have calamities. Perfect example, cruise in December, right? Vehicle was taking a non-cruise vehicle was taking a right turn. We got hit. Person was on the floor. A cruise vehicle was doing the same thing. Did not recognize that person as, there is a person on the floor. Did not recognize them. Ran over that person. And that one instance has, oh my gosh, I don't know the exact math right now, but I think it's half the value of the company, and it's the vast majority of the staff it's done a number to that company.
Yeah, had a devastating effect on.
Exactly. Don't quote me on the numbers, but I think they've lost half the stock value, and about half the company has been laid off as well. And I think then this massive sort of, oh my God, what do we do now state? GM is also considering whether to pull funding, I believe. That one edge case, that literally the one edge case, them not training on the weirder things, or has, shattered it. And that's symptomatic of, I think, AI as a whole, where you need a mechanism to understand what the range of phenomena, even if your vehicle has not seen it. And that's, I think, one of the coolest things that we do at dRISK, right? It's to be able to use this core graph tech that we have to be able to take data of any flavor, be able to map them onto each other, and actually ask questions as a whole. Two, for the purposes of AI, identify the weirder things, the things that are not common. And and that's what our core tool set now that we're developing it's focused on. So to be able to understand data, understand the anomalies of it in any data set, and then be able to bias AI in the correct ways by how you train it, so that it gets better at the things that are weirder, rarer, and uncommon, but not at the expense of what it performs or where it performs well.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the coolest thing to be able to do, where actually, there's this myth that, oh my God, AI is a complete black box. And our thesis is that, no, it isn't. If you have perfect insight into how the data structures are formed that go into training it, and you have perfect control over being able to bias it, sample it in the right way, find clusters of scenarios that are probably weirder, but ultimately will have more performance in the weirder things, and to be able to do this process quickly, faster and faster, getting more people involved in the process. Like, that's ultimately what makes it makes me whatever a happy camper and get up every morning to just be like it. And then when you extrapolate that narrative at higher levels across industries, it's just like, how do you get more and more people working with AI? I mean, right now the vast majority of the AI models out there require you to be a Stanford PhD electrical engineer, literally elite. And typically the several models tend to be privatized. You don't really have access to them. So, and like the way that I sort of look at it is, AI is a tool. How do you allow more and more people who do not need a heavy background in coding or to be able to like visually understand data and actually play around with it? I'm dyslexic and dysgraphic. I am the worst data scientist that exists, right? And I don't know anything about like math or high level math or formula or any of that. That is a complete alien venture to me. I mean, I was glad I passed math in high school, honestly. But to still be able to look at it from a completely different lens, right? And still be able to work with it as somebody who is, who's horrible at it natively. I mean, like that to me is like, it's an extremely powerful driver.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I think we touched on it briefly, didn't we, on our previous conversation? But I think sometimes, if you have too many people that at an incredibly high level discussing a subject, sometimes it makes that subject almost too complex and kind of difficult to understand. And I think, like you say, having, particularly from a UX kind of UI perspective, being able to simplify it down is always a good thing, isn't it? Talk to me about some of the applications outside of autonomous vehicles, because I know we kind of touched on that, but I know when we first spoke again, you gave me some examples of where you see the dRISK product kind of being implemented in other sectors.
Right. No, absolutely. So if you rewind a bit and you phrase the problem as, okay, who has tons of data that don't necessarily speak, that are kind of dirty and they don't necessarily speak to each other, and a data scientist's job is to effectively figure out, how do you fuse this? How do you actually build a model that leverages all of the data? I mean, that's a very hard job, and ultimately a lot of these models that people end up building can be very brittle, right? Because if you think about it, every organization has so many different types of weird data. What we allow is to be able to fuse that, get snapshots of much more complex data sets, and be able to interact with that almost instantly. And the same idea of being able to flag anomalies within the autonomous vehicle space, like weird scenarios. We've done this with healthcare, where we've been able to, in a matter of minutes, flag patients who should have been caught at earlier stages of their health process, but are brought into the emergency room because something went, they were just not flagged, and to be able to ultimately help, because you don't want to go to the emergency room with something that could have gotten caught much earlier, right? What are the anomalies in the healthcare space within patients that you can catch earlier? I mean, done this with finance data to be able to better predict how particular stock models are going to be, or a particular fund will perform based on being able to take not just data sets that an organization might use, but to be able to fuse that with varieties of even publicly available data sets to ultimately create a more robust model. And that's, and even for HR organizations, I mean, for HR organizing, there's so many companies out there where there's inherent tunnel vision going on in each of these projects, right? Even though people might have a lot of skills in certain spaces that might overlap with other projects that are going on, nobody knows. How do you get an understanding of all of the different people that are working on the topics that you're interested in, and be able to ultimately facilitate collaboration in a much smarter way that actually capitalizes on the talent that you have?
I understand. Yeah, it's interesting. So just moving on to our next question then, how do you think we'll interact with AI in the future? You know, our cars, our jobs, you know, anything.
Yeah, that's the fun question. This is the crux of it, right? AI has been, spoken about in sci-fi since, my gosh, I think it's like 40s and the 50s. I mean, I think you even have examples or manifestations of it being like quoted in Marx and stuff in like the 1800s, or like the machine, right? Been used for, like specifications easily from the late 90s, pattern rectangles and stuff. I mean, and then, Jeff Hinton in like 2011, really pushed the narrative that these multi-layer networks can be used for amazing things, to be able to find patterns that would have taken people forever. But again, like, they were just used in such limited slivers of society. I mean, ultimately for business applications that us as civilians would almost never touch, or we would get the consequences of an AI model. And I think there are a lot of great applications for it as well. I mean, it's same finding cancer, building models that pick up cancer and stuff. But at the same time, there are like horrific consequences as well. Wells Fargo building an application, training a model to figure out how to profit better, which ultimately created an algorithm that targeted African American people with the worst loans. Because again, like training bias. But again, people really had no recompense or an ability to contribute to that narrative unless, Wells Fargo gets sued at the end of it, which, ended up happening. But that cycle is a horrifically, I would say, evil cycle where people tend to be subject and almost victimized by an AI model, and then, have to spend years, if not decades, building a huge class action lawsuit to be able to like fight back and actually redeem that particular model. And that's where I see, the coolest way of how we interact with AI actually, that forefront of being able to democratize the process of actually engaging with AI. With what we do, it's how can you get anybody on this planet, or really any analyst, be able to work with very, very, very complex bits of data, right? And eventually, how do you get any civilian, any old freaking bird enthusiast who wants to train a model to figure out where the best spot is to go and observe a blue finch, and with data that he or she might have collected, that's sort of where I see the world of AI going. There are models out there, but you get to take it and make it your own and customize it and play with it a tool. The companies out there might be building the hammer, but you get to decide, the companies out there are building the mechanism for you to build a hammer, but you get to design the size, you get to design the handle material, how comfortable it is, so that it fits you for whatever need that you actually have. And what does this mean? You see, especially in like recent years with the advent of ChatGPT, everybody out there is like, AI. But you're not really interacting with AI. You are interacting with a model that somebody else has built that you have no insight into. And just prompting, and you get a couple of answers, and you have to keep prompting, and you get a couple of answers. You don't have the ability to bias the data in a way that you want. You kind of do, but you probably have to pay millions for it, right? And that's sort of where I see, the true sort of, the beauty of what AI as a tool can become, where it's a thing that anybody can use to interact with whatever they normally do, but in a way that gives them complete control, and for them to actually be stewards of an algorithm or stewards of a model, as opposed to the subject of it. So
yeah, I understand. Yeah, there must be other examples, mustn't there, within kind of technology, whereby, historically it has been financially restrictive or controlled, then it slowly kind of ekes out and is kind of taken up by the masses. And the internet's probably a good similar kind of example, right, where previously it was purely academic, and then we kind of all have access to it, and also the ability to create websites and add content and things like that. And it's
Exactly.
an interesting kind of analogy, isn't it?
I mean, you're so right. Well, the internet not for educational purposes, for military purposes, to be able to fire an intercontinental ballistic missile. I mean, this is what its purpose was in the 60s, right? By just pressing a button from somewhere else and create a web of information to be able to do that. And you're right. Even the first access people had to the internet was, through these quote unquote walled gardens of AOL and MSN, where you have the 7 services that everybody is going to use, right? It's the idea of it being this open thing that you can go and do whatever the hell you want that just did not exist. But I guess that's the process of technological evolution, right? Like, you start off doing a bunch of whatever B2B. I mean, you need some way of making money, right? And then eventually the technology becomes more and more accessible. Computers, IBM, the idea of somebody owning an actual computer and using that to do life was unfathomable before the PC and Steve Jobs. And I mean, like, that's sort of, I think, where we sit right now with AI, which is, I mean, everybody's out there. It's kind of hard to actually work with it if you are a mere civilian, but the process of being able to facilitate that to anybody and everybody, that's so cool.
Share with me, Kiran, again, we're always interested in getting kind of advice for younger people, looking to get into industry and at the early kind of stages of their career, right? What's one piece of career advice that you perhaps wish that you were given early on in your career?
One. Learn to be extroverted. Learn to even just wear that face. Because, I mean, I'm a vehemently introverted person. I mean, I'm so shy when it comes to talking to new people and pitching them and swaying a conversation and stuff. And that in closed settings in school and stuff may not, you may not see that it is so critical. I mean, you talk to your same professors, they give you feedback, but when it comes to the transitionary period after school, looking for jobs, or if you are in a startup environment and you have to do like 100 other things, and selling is one of those critical components, right? To be able to stand in front of a person or a group of people and very succinctly, in the shortest amount of time, be able to communicate what you do, why you do it, and how it's useful for them is one of the most important things that, like, I think I wish I learned, at a much earlier level, and gotten a lot more practice of it, because it's been it's tough, for introverts inherently to wear that face and sort of become this sleazy salesperson is not easy. And it's so important, because, I mean, we don't have massive marketing teams. We don't have massive sales teams, right? Like, it's you and maybe a few other people in the company who have to bear the weight of all of this. And as an individual, as somebody who's like just coming out of school or even going into school, and you want to figure out like what the program is about, this fearless, I mean, you might be petrified. That's totally fine. But to like put on the face of, of confidence and just being honest about, hey, what's up, man? This is what I do. This is what I'm interested in. And, being able to have those conversations and not shy away from it is critical. I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons that, one can be introverted, and culture is a huge thing. In India, people aren't known to be sleazy and being extroverted online, and there's a lot of, I think, stereotypical sort of bias that pushes people to be sort of humble and quiet and introverted and not put themselves out there. And to unlearn that was tough. That is definitely a bit of a curve that I don't think I had exposure to until much later in my career. And it's probably one of the most important things that I've
especially in a country like the US as well, right? I think one of the things that I've experienced as being a recruiter in the UK, worked in Singapore for a short time. I think we talked about, didn't we, on a previous call, and then again, working now in the US. Yeah, that ability, as you say, to kind of elevate a pitch, talk about yourself and what you do and what your goals are and what drives you is even more of a thing, I think, isn't it, in the US? Again, in the UK, we tend to sort of shy back from that. People see you as being a little bit, he's a bit for himself. I know, whereas I think in America, it's almost expected, that you kind of have this, as you say, this almost elevator pitch that you can talk about yourself and it's almost encouraged, isn't it? I think clients are disappointed. I recruiting in America. One of the things that I noted quite different was in the UK, when we get down the road of delivering candidates to clients, we're getting to offer stage. In the UK, clients will make an offer, remuneration, salary to candidate. And I've seen on quite a few occasions, if candidates push back, try and negotiate on that. Sometimes the clients are almost a little bit, they see it, there's,
how
dare they? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whereas in the US, it's almost expected. It's almost expected that there'll be that kind of back and forth of negotiation. And I had to learn that quite quickly, that it's not in the UK. We always try and manage expectations on both sides. We really try and understand what the candidate wants. Whereas I think I'm okay to kind of now just let that be more of a fluid process at offer stage. So I think it is. It's just those cultural differences are quite subtle. They're definitely there, aren't they?
No, absolutely. And if you don't learn to play that game, either you will be taken advantage of, either you may not. You'll just keep wondering, oh my God, why aren't I went and gave a talk. Why aren't we getting inbounds? Why aren't we getting leads? As the US, a lot of it is, stereotypical face value is critical. The image of what the brand of what you present or how you present is very important. And, learning that, people always tell me that, but it's a lesson that I don't think I actually adopted until much later in my career. So being taught is one thing, but actually practiced and being an expert at it is a whole other thing. So
absolutely. And finally, setbacks, challenges, everybody has them in a career journey. How do you, let me do that again. So challenges, everybody has challenges in their career journey. How do you approach challenges and setbacks in your career, in your personal life, and what's your kind of go-to strategy for overcoming those?
This is very multidimensional question as well. But it's, I think just generally being aware of what is around you, about yourself, of what you do at work, and be able to very critically think about it is absolutely essential, right? I joined a startup which crashed and burned spectacularly, and being an international student, like not having a green card, there is a 60-day death clock that you have to capitalize on. Otherwise, bye. The $100,000 loan that you've taken to come here is now, it's almost impossible to gain back, right? Obviously you can go back home, but the salaries there are nowhere as competitive as they are to the US. And so all of a sudden, this loan just becomes this anchor to your life, or this rock hard stone that you have to drag around. It's tough. The anxiety in those situations can be overwhelming. And in many cases it is, right? Not knowing future, not knowing whether you land or not, and whether all your life decisions that you've made to get to this point are whatever correct or horrendously wrong, right? Having healthy coping mechanisms to these situations, critical. I run a maniac, and I do not have any love for running. I hate doing marathons. I hate doing half marathons, but I do it because I just needed to burn off stress, and that just has to be done, and to wake up in the morning and just not feel defeated when, there are hundreds of these things are plaguing you. I think that is critical, to be able to find something, whatever it is. And this is an exploratory path that everybody has to go on. And anxiety is real. Life has a way of biting you in ways that you never expected it to bite, and put you into situations which, both professionally and personally, and inevitably it becomes this blob of both, that if you're not, if life isn't good at home, your work life suddenly becomes erratic, and you don't have an ability to gain confidence out of it. Same with work. If work is not right, and if you feel you're pushed into a corner, you're doing things that you're not really interested in, that can like spill over into other places, right? But just, I think, being aware of what's going on, have very, very important, very, healthy coping mechanisms, and ultimately, understand what you can control and what you can't. Because again, that's the little definition of wisdom, right? There are things that you probably have an ability to shape and manifest and control, and there are a bunch of things that you just straight up cannot. Being able to take the time to understand the difference, even if you feel that it is wasted time, I think is absolutely critical. And that is what I think touches my next point, which is, burnout is real. Burnout happens. I've been at the same place for 5.5 years. I've been super fortunate to have an extremely creative team who very supportive. I don't know anything about I do now, but I did not know much about high grade coding. I do not know how to code. But being surrounded by creative, intelligent people that pushes me, and it's been a really positive force to help ultimately learn more about myself, learn what I'm capable of, and ultimately push yourself, because you do always need that. But to understand that, wow, I'm not really doing well, or whatever, there are things that I'm doing which I just feel it's just an absolute waste of time, but I kind of have to do it. Taking time to be honest with yourself, to come to those conclusions, and then, figure out what you can do to change that, absolutely critical. I think that's what prevents burnout not prevents, but that's what helps you re-understand what burnout actually is, and recontextualize, the things that are causing that for you, and be able to, ultimately be a sharper, more dedicated person who actually ultimately cares at deeper levels for what they do. And that again helps, keep burnout at bay.
Perfect. So identifying the signs, and then having, as you say, some of those coping mechanisms to deal with these situations as they come up. Yeah, that's good. I think Stephen Covey, didn't he, in his 7 Habits book, he talks about sphere of influence, sphere of control, and exactly as you say, understanding the difference and being able to identify what are these things that I can control, and what are these things that actually are outside of my kind of sphere of control, but it's okay to be aware of them, but I can't let them influence, global conflicts and things like that. You kind of, as you say, if you allow it, can really kind of have an impact on you, but you've got to think, well, I don't have any real control over that, and therefore I shouldn't really let it influence how I'm feeling. So yeah, fantastic. That's good. Oh, Kiran, thanks so much for your time. It's been a really interesting conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it.